At 1 in the morning, I knocked on my daughter's door, stumbling. My body was covered in bruises. She opened it suddenly and gasped when she saw me. Her hands were shaking as she helped me inside. Between sobs, I told her what had happened. Michael beat me up. It was because of his mistress. I hugged her in silence. I sat her down in the kitchen and covered her with a blanket. Without saying a word, I went to the closet and took out my old police badge. I looked at it for a second and put it in my coat pocket as if it were a promise. Ready. I took a deep breath and dialed my lawyer's number. The plan starts now. Now, I said. Emily nodded with teary eyes. If you are watching this video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel William's Revenge Stories and tell me in the comments where you are listening to this story of revenge from. I returned home that night tired with an empty stomach and an aching back. I sat at the wooden table that had accompanied my life for decades and heated up a simple plate of beans with a piece of dry cheese. The house was silent. You could only hear the ticking of the wall clock and occasionally the howling of a dog in the distance. I ate slowly, chewing almost without appetite, thinking that loneliness had become my inevitable companion at 69 years old. Suddenly the phone rang. The ring cut through the silence abruptly and rumbled in my chest. I answered with a hoarse voice, and on the other end I heard Michael, my son-in-law. His tone was harsh and imperative. "Is Steve home? I want to come over and talk to you." He did not give me time to answer more than a quiet yes, and hung up without saying goodbye. I knew from his tone that he was not bringing anything good. An hour later, I heard the roar of an engine outside. Through the window, I saw the lights of a truck illuminate the entire facade. The creaking of the gate opening startled me, and immediately the strong smell of tequila filled my living room. Michael entered, stumbling, and behind him came a woman I did not know in person, but of whom I had already heard rumors. Jessica. She was wearing a dress that was too short and laughing loudly with a plastic cup full of alcohol in her hand. Without asking for my permission, she dropped into one of the chairs in my living room as if it were any bar. "Michael," I said calmly, swallowing my rage, "this is your father-in-law's house, not a dive bar." He hit the table with his open hand and pushed the chair back roughly. "Nosy old man, do not tell me how to live. This house will be mine sooner or later." Jessica let out a loud laugh, took the bottle they brought, and poured herself a drink in my glass without asking. I stood up slowly with my heart racing and pointed to the door. "Enough, Michael. Get out of my house and do not bring another woman here who is not my daughter." I did not manage to finish the sentence when I felt a sharp blow to my face. His hand had flown straight to my cheek and I fell backward. The edge of the table opened a cut on my forehead. The world was spinning and the sounds became distant. I tried to sit up, grabbing the chair, but Michael pushed me again, this time with his closed fist against my stomach. The air left me suddenly. I doubled over, gasping, unable to breathe. Jessica took a step towards him, nervous. "Stop, Michael, that is enough. He is going to die right here." But he pushed her away with a slap. "Leave him. This old man has to learn who is boss here." I crawled as best I could towards the door, my knees scraping the floor. My hands were shaking while I clutched my abdomen. As soon as I reached the doorframe, I felt a kick to my leg that made me groan. The pain shot up to my hip. Behind me, I heard Jessica's mocking laughter fade as Michael pulled her outside. The truck roared and disappeared down the street, leaving behind an echo of the engine and the sour smell of gasoline. I lay there for a few minutes, sweating cold, until I understood that I could not stay there. The loneliness of my room terrified me more than the pain. I needed a safe place, a familiar face. With trembling hands, I stood up, looked for the old gray coat hanging behind the door, and took my cane. The night was freezing. The wind ran through the narrow streets of the neighborhood, kicking up dust and papers. The dogs began to bark as soon as they saw me pass. Some ran behind rusty fences, showing their teeth. I walked, slowly, leaning on the cane. Every step was a knife in my stomach. Sweat soaked my shirt despite the cold. I passed in front of some houses. I heard doors opening just a crack. Shadows of neighbors poking their heads out, watching my stumbling walk. No one said anything. No one approached. They closed quickly as if fearing they would catch my misfortune. I felt like the street stretched on endlessly. The street lamp on the corner flickered, casting a yellowish glow on the dirt ground. I moved forward with my heart pounding in my chest until I finally reached my daughter Emily's house. My strength was at its limit. I held onto the wall, raised my fist, and knocked on the door. The hollow sound of the knock echoed in the silent early morning. No one answered. I insisted, weaker this time, almost scratching the wood with my knuckles. The door remained closed. I heard quick steps from inside, then my daughter's voice, nervous. "Who is it?" The lock turned and the door threw open. Emily appeared with her face pale, her eyes wide open, seeing me covered in blood and bruises, my clothes wrinkled and dirty. "Oh my God, Dad!" She screamed and held me before I fell. Her son, my grandson, appeared behind her in pajamas with a glass of water in his shaking hands. He offered it to me while crying uncontrollably. "Grandpa, what happened to you?" They sat me in the dining room chair. Emily ran from one side to the other looking for a towel, while my grandson did not let go of my hand, squeezing it with fear. I was breathing raggedly with a dry throat, but at least I was under a safe roof. The road there had been agony, but now, seeing my daughter and grandson, I knew that night was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. Emily held me tightly until she got me to the living room. I could barely move my legs. I felt like every step was torture. They sat me in the wooden chair by the table, and immediately my daughter ran to the kitchen. I heard her opening drawers desperately until she came back with a couple of clean towels and a small pot of hot water she had put on the fire in seconds. She took my face delicately, as if my bones were made of glass. Her hand was shaking so much that the damp cloth slipped from her. The warm water burned a little on the forehead, cut open by the blow against the table, but I bore it in silence. I did not want to scare her more than she already was. I saw tears falling from her eyes as she passed the cloth over my bloody cheek. The noise we were making attracted the neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. We heard a door slam in the house next door, and then quick steps in the patio. Without asking permission, she entered the living room with a small bottle of alcohol and a jar of antiseptic in her hand. "Good Lord, Steve!" she exclaimed upon seeing me. "What did they do to you?" I did not know what to answer. I just lowered my gaze while she soaked a cotton ball with alcohol and passed it gently over the wound. The stinging made me groan, and my grandson, who was standing by the table, began to cry louder. "Grandpa, let us call an ambulance," he said between sobs with his cell phone already in his hand. "Wait." Emily stopped him, putting her hand on his arm. "Let Dad calm down a little." She lifted my shirt slowly with fear. As she did, the air in the room touched my skin damp with sweat, and I could see the expression of horror on her face. My abdomen was covered by a huge dark bruise extending from my ribs to my navel. Mrs. Higgins put her hand to her mouth and murmured, "That is not from a simple fall, Emily. They beat him with full intention." I tried to straighten up, but a sharp pain forced me to lean back to one side. I breathed with difficulty. Every inhalation was like swallowing knives. Emily ran for a glass of water and brought it to my lips. I drank just a sip. My throat was so dry it was hard to swallow. She insisted, "Dad, you have to drink more, even if it is slowly." Meanwhile, Emily's cell phone vibrated tirelessly on the table. The screen lit up the room at intervals, always showing the same name. Michael. She looked at it with rage, not daring to answer. Finally, the phone emitted the sound of an incoming message. She opened it and went pale. She showed me the screen. "Tell that old man not to open his mouth or you will both regret it. And look what he has the nerve to send me." Emily screamed, squeezing the phone tightly. I shook my head slowly. "Daughter, leave it. Not now." I did not want my grandson to hear more words of hate in that house. The boy, with eyes swollen from crying, clung to my hand as if fearing I would vanish at any moment. At that instant, Mrs. Higgins interrupted. "I have something to show you." She took out her own cell phone, opened her security camera app, and after a few seconds showed us a video. On the screen, my stumbling silhouette was clearly seen in the middle of the night, banging on Emily's door, doubled over my cane, holding my belly. The sound captured my moans, weak but unmistakable. Emily covered her mouth, stifling a sob. Then she took the neighbor's phone and connected it to hers to save the recording. She also turned on the laptop and with nervous hands copied the file to an external hard drive. "Mrs. Higgins, please keep the original. This is too important," she asked her. The neighbor nodded firmly. "Do not worry, Emily. I also have daughters, and I do not plan to stay silent." After a few minutes, Mrs. Higgins returned to her house, not without first leaving her first aid kit on the table. Emily helped me get up. With her arm over her shoulders, she led me to the guest room. It cost me horrors to walk that short hallway as if every meter weighed a ton. She settled me in bed, placed a clean sheet over me, and adjusted the pillow under my head. "Do not move, Dad. Rest." I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the milk boiling in the kitchen. The warm aroma soon filled the house. After a short while, Emily returned with a cup of hot milk and a little honey. She sat me up carefully and brought the glass to my lips. I drank slowly, feeling the heat go down my throat and relieve me just a little. My grandson appeared with a box of medicines. He rummaged through the bottles, confused. "Mom, which one do I give him?" Emily checked and took out some pills for the pain. She gave me one with a sip of water. I obeyed in silence while the boy curled up in the corner of the bed, still crying softly. Time passed slowly. Outside, the dog started barking again. Headlights from a truck suddenly illuminated the window. The white light swept across the room like a knife, and Emily stood up, startled. She ran to the living room, locked the door well, and came back to close the curtains abruptly. It was a truck that passed slowly. She said with a trembling voice, "I am sure it was Michael's people. No one slept again that night." The clock marked the hours with its insistent ticking. I lay staring at the ceiling with the pain in my abdomen throbbing like a drum. Emily went back and forth from the living room to the bedroom, checking locks, dimming lights, listening to every noise on the street. Mrs. Higgins knocked on the door again later just to make sure we were okay. Emily whispered through the window that everything was under control. The neighbor returned to her house, leaving a bright light on in her patio as a sign that she was watching. My grandson finally fell asleep, hugging my cane as if it were a toy. I watched him, feeling a mix of tenderness and guilt. The early morning advanced slowly. I heard the distant hum of a motorcycle, the echo of a cat fighting on the roofs, the creaking of the house's wood under the cold. Emily, exhausted, sat on the side of the bed with her computer on her lap. She started writing something quickly, copying the photos of my injuries and the camera video. The glow of the screen illuminated her tired face. When she finished, she looked at me and said in a low voice, "Dad, we have proof. We are not alone. But tomorrow we have to go to the hospital. We cannot wait any longer." I nodded, unable to say anything. I felt my body heavy, the constant pain in every breath, and a shadow of fear growing in the room. I knew that night would not be the last time we would hear threats. The silence surrounding us was not peace. It was just the prelude to the storm that was about to arrive. Dawn arrived with the crowing of roosters that pulled me from a light sleep. I had barely closed my eyes for a couple of hours, and my body still burned with pain. From the bed, I heard the metallic call of a loudspeaker approaching. It was the food cart that went through the neighborhood every morning, with that repetitive voice filling all the streets. Hot coffee, fresh donuts, breakfast sandwiches. The sound brought me for an instant the feeling that everything was still the same in the world, but my aching abdomen and the metallic taste in my mouth reminded me that nothing was the same. I lay still with my eyes half closed, still smelling the strong scent of an ointment Emily had rubbed on me in the night. The menthol burned my skin, but at the same time calmed me a little. Suddenly I heard soft steps. It was my grandson entering very carefully, carrying a steaming glass between his small hands. "Grandpa, here is some warm milk," he told me in a tiny voice, as if fearing to break the silence. The glass trembled in his hand, almost spilling. He took it with both hands to make sure and left it on the small table next to the bed. Then he leaned towards me and whispered, "Do not go out today, Grandpa. Stay here, please." I caressed his head with a trembling hand. I did not have the strength to answer more than with a look. A few minutes later, Emily appeared with a bowl of freshly made chicken soup. The steam rose, mixing with the smell of fresh herbs and onions. She placed it on a tray, helped me sit up, and insisted, "Dad, you have to eat something. You need strength." I was about to taste the first spoonful when a loud knock on the patio door interrupted everything. 3 knocks in a row hurried as if someone wanted to enter immediately. Emily left the plate on the table and ran to the gate. I stayed listening, my heart clenched. Upon opening Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor appeared panting as if she had run. Her hair was messy, her blouse buttoned wrong, and her cell phone clutched in her hand. "Emily," she said, almost breathless. "I have it. I already downloaded it. Here is the proof." She handed her a small USB drive wrapped in a napkin. Emily took it with nervous hands and looked at me seriously. "Dad, we have to see it." They helped me get out of bed, and with slow steps I reached the living room. There on the table, they turned on the old laptop. The sound of the device's internal fan filled the room while the screen lit up. Mrs. Higgins connected the USB, and after a few seconds of silence, the recording appeared. I saw myself stumbling in the darkness of the street, leaning on my cane with my shirt stained. My knocks on the door and my moans, weak and pitiful, could be heard. No one spoke during the minutes the video lasted. The only sound was the hum of the fan and the slow turning of the ceiling fan that creaked with every turn. Emily pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on the screen, and then copied the file to the hard drive, the cell phone, and an external memory stick. Every click of the keyboard sounded like a hammer blow in the middle of the silence. "This is your defense, Steve," said Mrs. Higgins, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Never lose it." I tried to thank her, but only a thread of voice came out. "Thank you. You do not know what this means to me." She shook her head. "Yes, I do know. I also have daughters. We cannot stay silent." At that moment, Emily's cell phone vibrated again. On the screen, 5 missed calls flashed, all from the same number. "Michael." Emily did not answer, but soon a message came in that she read aloud with contained rage. "Crazy old woman, let my woman go. Tell that old man not to invent things." Emily squeezed the phone so hard I thought it would break in her hand. Then she turned it off and went to look for a SIM card she kept as a spare. In a matter of minutes, she changed the chip and the device stopped ringing. "You will not be able to keep tracking us," she said, taking a deep breath. Mrs. Higgins did not leave right away. She stayed a good while helping my daughter change my bandages. Her hands smelled of laundry soap and alcohol, and her gesture was one of unexpected tenderness. "Let him rest a little, Emily," she recommended. "And early in the morning take him to the hospital. That swelling in the belly can be dangerous." My daughter nodded, although her eyes shone with worry. When Mrs. Higgins finally left, I approached the window. Through the curtains, I managed to see a boy standing on the corner, leaning on an old motorcycle. He was not smoking. He was not speaking. He was just looking toward our house. His posture gave him away. He was not there by chance. Emily ran to lock the latch and lowered the blinds with a sharp bang. She said nothing, but I understood the same as her. Michael had sent someone to watch us. The rest of the day passed in a false calm. None of us went out. From inside, we listened to the sounds of the neighborhood, the call of the fruit seller, the whistle of the knife sharpener, the murmur of women chatting in front of the store. Everything seemed normal like any other day, but in our house, every noise was a threat, every shadow a warning. My grandson played silently with some toy cars on the floor, although from time to time he looked at me sideways as if to ensure I was still breathing. Emily kept herself busy organizing papers, storing the USB drives in different drawers as if she were building a fortress with documents. I remained lying on the bed, listening to the life of the neighborhood from a distance, the shouts of children playing ball, the music from a radio in the house next door, the smell of fresh bread filtering through the window. All that contrasted with the weight I carried inside, a weight that was not only physical but also of fear and shame. We spent that entire day locked up as if the house had ceased to be a refuge and had become a trench. Outside, the world went on with its routine, but inside these walls we knew we were under Michael's gaze. I breathed with difficulty, feeling the pain in every movement. But more than the bodily pain, what drowned me was the certainty that this was just starting. And that video in the hands of Emily and Mrs. Higgins was both our salvation and the reason for new threats. The tension could be cut in the air. And I, lying there with eyes fixed on the ceiling, understood that the day was slipping away in silence, while the rope that tied us to fear tightened more and more, as if it were going to break at any moment. That afternoon, Emily insisted that I go out for a moment to get some fresh air. She helped me with patience to reach the iron bench we had on the porch. My steps were short, clumsy, and every movement reminded me of the pain in my abdomen. The sun was going down slowly, dyeing the walls an orange tone. The fresh evening air caressed my face and made me close my eyes for an instant. A group of children played ball in the street. The sound of laughter should have given me peace, but hearing how they suddenly fell silent upon seeing me, I felt a knot in my stomach. One of them whispered without knowing I could hear him, "The grandpa on the corner is sick." My face burned with shame, not for being injured, but for feeling exposed, vulnerable, reduced to an object of whispers. I said nothing. I lowered my gaze and gripped the cane tightly. The silence was broken by a familiar call. In the distance, the tinkling of bells and a clear voice traveling down the block. Ice-cold lemonade. Fresh iced tea. The metal cart passed, pushed by a smiling young man. The sweet smell of syrup and crushed ice reached us, mixing with the street dust. For a moment I remembered the summers when I myself took Emily by the hand to buy iced tea after school. Nostalgia hit me harder than the physical pain. While I lost myself in those memories, a familiar figure appeared. Dr. Sarah Miller, our trusted doctor, was hurrying up the steps with her medical bag in hand. "Good afternoon, Steve," she said with a firm tone. "Emily called me, and I came to check on you." She barely let me react. She took out the blood pressure cuff, took my pressure, and then with a flashlight checked my pupils. Her brow furrowed. "You have severe contusion, Steve. This is not something minor. You need X-rays, and soon." Emily was already getting up to look for the truck keys, but I managed to grab her wrist. "No, not tonight. I do not want to make noise. Let us go tomorrow morning." The doctor looked at me sternly. "It is risky to wait, but I understand your fear. I am going to leave you some painkillers. Take them every 8 hours, and if the pain increases, do not wait, go to the hospital. She took a sheet from her bag, wrote some notes, and stamped her seal. The dry sound of the pen on paper made me shudder. That document with a signature and mention of my injuries remained as the first official record of what I had suffered. Take care, Steve. This can get worse, she warned, before saying goodbye. When she left, I stayed, looking at the paper on the table. The red stamp stood out like a brand of fire. I felt that piece of paper could mean justice someday, but it also reminded me how low I had fallen. I needed documents and proofs to demonstrate I was not lying, that I was not a weak old man inventing stories. Evening fell quickly. Emily turned on the neon lamp on the patio. The tube flickered several times before turning on completely, illuminating the cracked walls and the worn floor. The greenish light made me feel even older, as if even my skin looked more withered under that glow. Shortly after, another visitor appeared. Mrs. Higgins, with her apron still on, crossed the street with a pot of steaming chicken stew. The smell of herbs and garlic filled the living room when she uncovered the pot. "This will give you strength, Steve," she said, smiling, although her eyes showed concern. Emily served a bowl and gave it to my grandson to hand to me. The boy concentrated, blew on every spoonful before bringing it to my mouth. I ate slowly with difficulty, but every bite comforted me. The taste of fresh herbs seemed to cleanse the sadness for an instant. Suddenly, the engine of a truck broke the tranquility. The vehicle moved slowly down the street, so slowly that the headlights shone fully on the facade of our house. The beam of light entered through the cracks and swept the living room. It stayed motionless for a few seconds in front of the gate. Emily reacted immediately. She turned off the neon lamp with a click, leaving only a small bulb inside the house, and signaled us to be silent. I felt everyone's held breath. The boy squeezed my hand with fear in his eyes. The vehicle started again, accelerating, and left behind a trail of smoke and the smell of burnt gasoline. Only when the noise was lost in the distance did Emily turn the dim light back on. No one said anything, but we all knew the same thing. It was a message. Michael was watching us. The atmosphere remained charged. Neither the stew, nor the aroma of herbs, nor the lit lamp managed to dispel the tension. Shame mixed with rage inside me. How could it be that I, who had worked all my life, ended up like this, hiding in my own house, fearing the steps of my own son-in-law? The night advanced slowly. Emily took me back to the room, and while I tried to fall asleep, she opened her computer on the table next to the bed. The click of the keys filled the silence. I saw her typing fast with determination. "Dad," she told me without looking away from the screen, "I am writing to Lawyer Thompson. He will know how to help us." She attached the photos of my bruises, the video from Mrs. Higgins's camera, and wrote a brief account of what happened. I listened to the constant tapping of the keys and felt a strange mix of humiliation and relief. Humiliation for having to prove what I had suffered. Relief because finally someone would listen to us. When she finished, she let out a deep sigh and took my hand. "Dad, tomorrow we will no longer be alone." I found no words. I just squeezed her hand with the little strength I had left. I closed my eyes while the barking of dogs in the distance and the buzzing of insects accompanied the night. Sleep reached me, slowly interrupted by pains and the certainty that the storm was just beginning. The next morning, when the sun barely illuminated the neighborhood roofs, Emily already had her old motorcycle ready. The engine coughed upon, starting as if resisting to go out, but finally started with a tired roar. She handed me a simple helmet and a wide-brimmed hat to cover my face. I also tied a dark bandana around my cheeks to hide the bruises that still hurt. It was uncomfortable but necessary. I did not want anyone to recognize me in that state. We left slowly through the alley, taking care not to attract attention. The morning air hit my face and made my wounds burn, but I kept silent. We stopped at a small cafe on the corner of the main avenue. The place smelled of freshly ground coffee and sweet bread, but I could barely taste a sip of the cup we ordered to blend in. From there, we observed the coming and going of people, vendors setting up their stalls in the market, children with backpacks walking to school, cars honking as they passed. A friend of Emily's, a guy named Charlie who worked at the market, approached and greeted us quickly. Feigning a trivial conversation, he whispered, "I have seen him every night at the Arch Bar over in the Hidalgo district. He always arrives with a very flashy woman." Emily looked at me and nodded. I looked down, feeling rage run through my chest. The beatings were not enough. The threats were not enough. Michael also exhibited his betrayal in public. We spent the day waiting for the right moment. I remained silent almost the entire time, sitting on a market bench, watching the sun descend slowly. When evening fell and the lights started to turn on in the streets, we followed Michael's gray truck from afar. We kept a good distance in traffic, taking care not to attract attention. The Arch Bar received us with its usual racket. Country music came out at full volume, mixed with the smell of spilled beer and tobacco. Neon lights flickered, illuminating the pavement full of cigarette butts and broken glass. Michael's truck parked in front of the entrance. We saw him get out with his shirt, ironed, shoes shining, and neck erect as if he owned everything. From the nearby alley, Jessica emerged. Her red dress stood out under the neon light, and her heels hit the ground as if marking the rhythm of an invisible song. In one hand, she had a lit cigarette, and in the other a small purse. When Michael hugged her by the waist and kissed her cheek, both laughed without worrying about who saw them. I took out my phone with trembling hands. My heart beat so fast I felt it would give me away with its noise. I took quick photos. Michael's face, hers, the truck, the license plate. Every click was a stab of pain and humiliation, but also an act of resistance. Some young men sitting on the sidewalk whistled at Jessica. She ignored them, and Michael, instead of being bothered, smiled, satisfied, like a rooster in a pen. He raised his hand and called a waiter from the door. "Bring me tequila, the good stuff." Emily, hidden behind a parked bus, whispered to me, "Dad, we need more proof. Do not stop." When they entered the bar, we stayed outside, waiting. The noise was constant. Laughter, glasses clinking, the metallic sound of a jukebox. Cigarette smoke mixed with the smell of sweat and street fryers. We were there for more than an hour, enduring the tension, pretending to be just passers-by. Finally, we saw them leave. Michael walked, stumbling with his jacket open and his arm wrapped around Jessica's waist. She rested her head on his shoulder, laughing loudly. They got into the truck and drove off towards the north of the city. Emily accelerated the bike enough not to lose them, always keeping distance. I barely breathed. The fear that they would discover us squeezed my chest. After about 15 minutes, the truck stopped in front of a small hotel with an old facade illuminated by a red sign that blinked intermittently. The sign said Garden Motel with some letters already burnt out. They got out of the vehicle and, holding hands, entered without hesitation. Michael even opened the door with a gentlemanly gesture. I took out the phone and took several photos. The couple entering, the luminous sign, the parked truck, the digital clock of a store next door marking the exact time. I wanted there to be no doubt about what was happening. We did not stay longer. With her heart racing, Emily turned the bike in the opposite direction, and we moved away from there. The night air whipped my face, but what really burned me was the betrayal. When we got home, the first thing Emily did was connect the phone to the computer. She copied every file to the laptop memory, to a hard drive, and to a USB stick. I watched her sitting in silence while my hands sweated on the cane. She closed the computer forcefully and looked me straight in the eyes. "Dad, this is no longer just violence. It is complete betrayal." I could not answer. Shame clouded my sight. Helplessness weighed on me like a slab. I stayed silent with the photos printed in my mind, knowing I had seen Michael's true face. Not only that of the violent man who beat me, but also that of the shameless traitor who mocked my daughter and our family. That night I did not sleep. Sitting by the window with the USB stick hidden in my coat pocket, I understood I had taken a step that would have no turning back. We had seen his face, his true face, and we could no longer pretend it did not exist. 2 days after that night, when we discovered Michael's betrayal, I was trying to rest in bed at Emily's house. The pain in the abdomen was still constant, and although the bruises on the face began to change color every time I saw myself in the mirror, they reminded me how fragile I had become. The apparent calm broke when the landline in the living room rang. That metallic sound so common made me jump. Emily answered and passed me the receiver. I recognized immediately the deep voice of Mr. Davis, an official from the property registry with whom I had dealt in the past. "Steve, how are you?" he asked with caution. "Look, you should stop by my office. There is a strange matter with your land." I felt a chill. I could barely articulate. "My land? What happened?" "I prefer you see it with your own eyes. Come as soon as possible." I hung up with ragged breathing. Emily, seeing my pale face, did not ask more. She just looked for the keys and helped me get on her motorcycle. The journey was uncomfortable. Every bump in the road tore a groan from me. The air smelled of dust and charcoal smoke from street vendors. On a corner, a man was shouting, "Roasted corn with mayo and cheese." The tempting aroma contrasted with the knot I carried in my stomach. We passed children running after a ball, women carrying market bags, old people chatting on the sidewalk. For them, life went on normal. For me, everything was crumbling. We arrived at the modest building where Mr. Davis worked. The wooden gate was peeling, and upon opening it creaked as if it also kept secrets. Inside, the air was dense, smelling of old paper and printer ink. Mr. Davis came out to receive us. He was wearing his usual wrinkled shirt, but in his eyes I noticed a different seriousness. "Steve, please come in," he said, lowering his voice. He took us to a small office barely lit by a fluorescent tube that flickered. He closed the door and looked for a file of documents on his desk. He extended them in front of me with a grave gesture. "Look at this." My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the pages. There it was written, "My land." My family's land had been transferred to the name of Jessica. The date was just a week ago. My hands were shaking. I kept turning pages until I found something that left me frozen. My signature and Emily's forged grotesque with an official red seal. I recognized the registry letterhead and even the signature of a notary I knew by sight. It was like seeing my identity stolen and stamped in ink. "This is not possible," I murmured, feeling my voice failing. Mr. Davis looked at me with regret and lowered his voice. Someone inside the office facilitated this, but the one who delivered the papers was Michael, I am sure. Emily, with her face flushed with rage, snatched the documents and began photographing every page with her cell phone. The shutter sound repeated again and again like shots in the middle of that tense silence. "We need official copies, Mr. Davis," I demanded with a threat of voice. He nodded without hesitation. He turned on an old printer and began to make certified copies. Every sheet carried a red seal and his signature at the bottom. He handed me the folder solemnly, as if he were passing a weapon in the middle of a war. "Be careful, Steve. This is dangerous. Do not show it to just anyone." At that moment, a horn sounded outside. It was a city bus passing, and the noise of passengers entering and leaving contrasted with the sepulchral silence of the office. I felt I lived in two different worlds, one where everything remained normal and another where my life and my daughters were crumbling. We said goodbye to Mr. Davis, who squeezed my hand tightly. Emily put the folder in her backpack as if it were a fragile treasure. The way back felt eternal to me. She drove concentrated while I observed the streets full of people buying fruit, afternoon tacos, grocery bags. A street vendor shouted, "Cheap avocados, very ripe." That normality hurt me because I knew my world no longer had anything normal. We stopped at a trusted print shop. Emily entered alone with the documents, while I stayed outside, leaning on the cane, watching life pass. The smell of fresh ink reached me from inside, mixed with the street noise. I heard a child crying because they did not buy him candy, a man haggling for a belt, a woman laughing on the phone. Everything went on, but I felt like a small man trapped in a whirlwind of deceit. Emily came out after a few minutes with several more copies and a USB. "Now we have everything backed up, Dad." When we got home, the tension was palpable. We closed doors and windows and carefully opened the old metal chest that kept important documents. We placed the original folder there, well secured with a padlock. We kept one of the copies in an envelope that we gave to Mrs. Higgins, who accepted without asking questions, although I saw the worry in her eyes. At nightfall, the family gathered at the table. There was nothing special. Rice, beans, and a piece of roast meat Emily had bought at the market. The smell of food filled the kitchen, but no one ate with tranquility. The silence broke when Emily hit the table with her hand and put the papers in the middle. "Now, Dad. We have him cornered." I looked at her. Her voice was firm, her eyes shone with a mix of rage and determination. I nodded in silence. I did not have the strength to speak, but I understood that those red seals, those false signatures, were more than papers. They were proof of how far Michael was willing to go. I stayed watching the red ink on the sheets like bloodstains on our family history, and I knew the line had been crossed. It was no longer just about blows or humiliations. Now it was about theft, about betrayal with the law on his side. That night, in the silence broken only by the patio crickets, I understood that our fight would no longer be just in the house, but also in the courts. And although fear was still in me for the first time, I felt we had something to fight with. It was a Saturday morning when we decided we could not wait any longer. Emily looked me in the eyes while pouring coffee into 2 cups and said firmly, "Dad, it is time we face him." I knew it would not be easy. My ribs still hurt, and every step I took reminded me of the beating I had received. But the moment had arrived. I put on the old brown coat, the one I used in the hardest winters, and adjusted the wide-brimmed hat. With a handkerchief, I covered part of my face still marked by bruises. In the leather bag, I carried the essentials. The photos of Michael with Jessica, the copies of the forged documents, and the memory stick with the video of that early morning I arrived, beaten, at my daughter's house. It was like carrying a silent arsenal. The way to the pawn shop was torture. Emily drove, concentrated, and I watched the city wake up. Juice sellers on corners. Mothers scolding their children because they were late for Saturday school. The smell of gasoline mixed with fresh pastries from the bakeries. But my mind was fixed on a single goal: to look him in the eyes and show him I was no longer afraid. Michael's pawn shop was on the corner of a busy avenue. The noise of cars and horns mixed with the hum of engines. From the sidewalk, a penetrating smell escaped. A mix of oil, old metal, and cigarette smoke. Two tattooed guys with black t-shirts and thick chains on their necks were leaning on the door. They were smoking and laughing among themselves until they saw us arrive. One of them let out a loud laugh. "Look, the father-in-law arrived." The other responded with a mocking whistle. I did not answer. I gripped the cane and advanced with slow but firm steps. I felt their gaze on my back, mocking, but at the same time expectant. Inside, the light was dim. A couple of fluorescent tubes flickered, illuminating shelves full of pawned objects. Old watches covered in dust, rusty radios, small televisions with spots on the screen, guitars without strings. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the sweet smell of a half-extinguished cigar. There at the back, behind a scratched wooden desk, was Michael. He was wearing a white shirt with 2 buttons undone, a shiny watch on his wrist, and a bundle of crumpled bills in his hand. With the other, he held a cigar resting on a glass ashtray full of ashes. "What happened, Steve?" he said with a fake smile. "Should you not be in bed?" Emily held my arm, but I moved forward. I placed a bulky envelope on his desk. The sound of papers hitting the wood resonated in the whole room. He arched an eyebrow, curious. Calmly, I opened the envelope and showed the evidence. The photos of my bruises, Mrs. Higgins' camera video, the forged documents with the altered signatures. For an instant his eyes narrowed as if a shadow crossed his face, but immediately he smiled again, cynical. He slapped the table and said, "So what? I have better lawyers than you." His contempt froze my blood. I felt rage rising to my throat, but I held back. Before he could speak, Emily took a step forward and dropped another envelope on the table. Sharp photographs of him hugging Jessica in front of the hotel, the license plate of his truck, the luminous clock marking the exact time. Michael's smile twisted for just a second. One of the men who had followed us from the door advanced towards us with a threatening gesture. I put my hand in my coat and took out a small object. My old police badge. I still kept it. I raised it so he could see it well, and my look was enough. The thug stopped dead, retreated a couple of steps, and raised his hands in a sign of calm. The other did the same. It was not a weapon I had, but it was a warning. I was not alone. I was not a defenseless old man. Michael changed his tone. He was no longer smiling. His voice became harsh, loaded with hate. Useless old man. Always sticking your nose where it does not belong. That land is no longer yours. And you, daughter. He looked at Emily with impudence. You are nothing more than my property. The air left me suddenly, as if he had punched me again. I felt humiliation burn my skin, but also a new strength that forced me to stay standing. I put the documents in the envelope, put them back in my bag, and closed them calmly. I leaned a little towards him and said in a low, firm voice, "See you in court, Michael. There you will not be able to buy the law." My statement fell in the room like a brick in water. Michael stood up suddenly and hit the table with his fist. The bundle of bills flew to the floor and scattered everywhere. His men watched undecided, not daring to move. "If you cross that door, you are no longer part of my family," he shouted with his face red with fury. Emily took my arm and helped me turn toward the exit. I walked slowly. Every step rumbled on the cement floor. Upon leaving, the daylight blinded me for a moment. The bustle of the avenue hit my ears again. Horns, engines, voices. A street vendor passed shouting, "Ice-cold lemonade." That daily call contrasted with the violence we had just left behind. I stopped for an instant, leaning on the cane. I felt my heart racing, but at the same time inside me there was clarity. There was no turning back. Emily looked at me and said in a low voice, squeezing my hand, "We faced him, Dad, and we are not going to stop." I nodded. We had opened a dangerous door, but at least we were no longer walking in the dark. Now we knew what we were really facing. Michael's true face. The man who not only had beaten me, but wanted to destroy our dignity. And while we moved away from the pawn shop with the sound of the city enveloping us, I knew the next battle would be even bigger. A week after that confrontation at the pawn shop, Emily and I arrived at the city courthouse. The place was crowded. In front of the building, curious people, neighbors and journalists, with cameras hanging from their necks, gathered. Flashes did not stop popping, and every shot of the camera reminded me that it was no longer just a family matter. It was a public spectacle. I wore my old suit, the same one I used at weddings and baptisms years ago. The fabric was worn, and the tie, a faded blue, had a loose knot because my hands shook too much to adjust it. By my side, Emily wore a simple black dress, but in her eyes shone a firmness that contrasted with my tiredness. In her hands, she held a thick file, almost like a shield. We entered the precinct. The high ceiling and the fans turning with a constant screech gave a sensation of ancient solemnity. The wooden benches creaked when people began to sit. The murmur filled the room. Some neighbors pointed at us, others whispered phrases that stuck in me like knives. "They say Steve invents everything to take money from the son-in-law." I heard behind my back. I swallowed saliva and gripped the cane. I felt a burning of shame, but decided not to turn my head. Then I saw him enter. Michael appeared with a new suit, shoes polished like mirrors. He walked erect, sure of himself, and behind him came a man who commanded respect. Lawyer Bradford, a renowned attorney in the capital known for his astronomical fees. The simple fact of seeing him caused a void in my stomach. Michael sought my gaze and smiled with contempt like someone who already feels like a winner. The judge, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, took his seat. The clerk announced the start of the hearing, and the murmur died down. My lawyer, Lawyer Thompson, stood up. With a firm voice, he began to expose the case. He spoke of the injuries certified by Dr. Miller, the video captured by the neighbor's camera, the photos showing Michael with Jessica at the hotel, and finally the forged documents proving the intention to strip me of my land. The judge nodded and asked for the video to be projected. On the big screen, everyone could see my stumbling figure in the early morning, banging on Emily's door in desperation, bent over my pain. The sound of my moans filled the room. I felt my face burn with shame, but at the same time I heard sobs among the audience. Some women wiped away tears. The whispers changed tone. When it was the defense's turn, Bradford stood up. His voice was powerful, rehearsed. He walked slowly in front of the judge like an actor on stage. "All this is a setup," he said with confidence. "Steve seeks to extort his own son-in-law. The daughter manipulates this old man to keep an inheritance that does not correspond to her." His words caused an immediate murmur. Some spectators shook their heads, others, undecided, looked at each other. I felt a knot in my chest. I wanted to get up and scream that it was a lie, but my lawyer stopped me with a gesture. Michael, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair with a grimace of triumph, whispering something in Bradford's ear. It was then that Emily, unable to contain herself, stood up. She raised the bundle of photographs and showed them high. Here are the proofs. Michael with Jessica at the hotel. The truck. The exact time. The judge hit the table with his gavel. Order in the court. My lawyer asked to call the first witness, Mrs. Higgins. The neighbor went up to the stand with a firm step. She held the original USB with both hands as if carrying a relic. She declared without hesitation. I saw Steve arrive that night myself. He was beaten. He could barely stand. I heard him knock on the door. I saw him on my camera. No one told me. I saw it. The judge asked to play the recording from her device. Again, the whole room filled with that dry sound of my knocks on the door, of my broken voice begging. The silence became heavy. Michael lost his cool. He stood up and shouted, "Gossiping old woman! Everyone knows you hate me." The judge interrupted him immediately. "Silence. One more word and I expel you from the room." The rage on Michael's face was evident. His fists clenched on the table, knuckles white. Then they called Dr. Miller. She, with her white coat still on, explained with serenity. The injuries Steve suffered clearly correspond to recent blows and not an accidental fall. The bruise on his abdomen is typical of a forceful impact. She presented the medical file she had signed at my house days before. The judge glanced at the papers with attention. The rustling of the sheets as they turned sounded like hammer blows in the silence of the room. I breathed with difficulty. My chest tightened, not only from physical pain but from the anguish of feeling my life exhibited reduced to proofs, papers, and testimonies. However, seeing Emily standing with eyes shining with determination gave me back a little strength. Bradford still tried to discredit the documents. He spoke of alleged inconsistencies of family conspiracies. His words sounded convincing to whoever wanted to doubt. But every time he launched an accusation, Thompson responded calmly, showing another copy, another seal, another date that contradicted him. The tension was unbearable. The ceiling fans kept turning. The repetitive sound filled the silences between each intervention. The audience murmured, some indignant, others still suspicious. I clung to my cane, aware that what was at stake was not just a piece of land, but my dignity, my daughter's safety, the truth of what I had lived. The session lasted hours, and at the end of that day, the only clear thing was that the evidence on our table was solid, and that Michael was beginning to lose ground. I saw him clench his teeth with his face distorted. And although there was still a way to go for the first time, I felt the scale of justice could tip in our favor. The atmosphere in the room had become unbearable after hours of accusations and replies. The judge asked for silence, and after reviewing the list, announced with a solemn voice, "Let the next witness pass. Jessica." A murmur ran through the precinct, like a gust of wind. Some people let out surprised exclamations, and there were those who whistled with mockery. The judge hit the gavel hard on the table. Silence in the court. Then I saw her enter. Jessica, that woman I had seen so many times on Michael's arm in bars, no longer had the same haughty air. She wore a simple light gray dress, and her makeup was faded as if she had cried before coming. Her hands clutched a small purse that seemed to weigh tons on her. She walked with short steps, looking down until she stood in front of the stand. I looked sideways at Michael. His face paled for an instant, although he tried to hide it. He tilted his head toward his lawyer, Bradford, and whispered something with visible urgency. The lawyer listened, but it was too late. Jessica had taken a seat, and the judge asked her to testify. She took a deep breath, and with a broken voice began. Michael promised me part of Steve's land. He showed me papers already signed, and I saw myself how he forged his signature and his daughter's. The murmur became a roar. The benches creaked as people leaned forward to hear better. I felt a lurch in my chest. For months I had carried the humiliation that no one believed me. Now that woman who had been complicit in so many of his betrayals was telling the truth. Michael exploded. He stood up suddenly, face red. "Liar! I gave you everything, and this is how you pay me." The guards approached, immediately pushed him back into his seat. The judge looked at him sternly and warned, "One more word and I take you out of the room." The silence was restored, tense like a rope about to break. Jessica lowered her gaze but continued speaking, now with more firmness. "He took me several times to hotels. He told me that when the paperwork was finished I would be the owner of half the land. He asked me to keep silent, not to talk about our relationship. The room filled with whispers. A man in the audience said loudly, "So everything said was true." Emily squeezed my hand tightly. Her face was flushed, eyes glassy, but her look was hard, determined. I felt the shame that had accompanied me so long transform into something different, a mix of relief and contained rage. Lawyer Thompson asked permission from the judge to present more evidence. Jessica took her cell phone out of her purse with a trembling hand. She showed several text messages she had saved. On the screen in clear letters appeared the evidence. "When the paperwork is finished, you will be the owner of half." The judge nodded and ordered them projected on the big screen. The whole room could read them. There was a generalized murmur, and many of those who until then doubted me began to nod among themselves. In the back row I saw Mrs. Higgins. She smiled barely and whispered to her neighbor, "I always knew it. That man is a scoundrel." Michael, meanwhile, shifted in his seat. He bit his lower lip, sweat beaded on his forehead. His hands gripped the arms of the chair tightly as if he wanted to break it. Bradford tried to compose himself, looking for words to object, but even he seemed thrown off. I breathed with difficulty, but for the first time in a long time I felt a small respite. It was not me against the world. There was someone else. A person who had been close to Michael, willing to reveal his true face. The judge thanked Jessica for her testimony and asked her to withdraw. She lowered her gaze and left quickly as if she wanted to disappear. For a few seconds no one spoke. The weight of her words still floated in the air, thick, impossible to ignore. Emily leaned toward me and whispered with a broken voice, "Dad, we are doing it." I did not answer. I just squeezed her hand tightly. I knew there was still a way to go, that Michael and his lawyer would keep trying to destroy us. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer just a beaten old man asking for justice. Now we had witnesses, proofs, and even the complicity of those who previously kept silent. Michael, powerless, could only hang his head. His arrogance was beginning to crack in front of everyone, and I, sitting with the cane resting on my knee, understood that although the sentence was still missing, the truth had begun to open its way. After almost 3 hours of arguments, heavy silences, and discussions that seemed never to end, Judge Arthur Cervantes returned to the room. He carried a thick file of documents in his hands. The audience's murmur died down instantly. The monotonous sound of the ceiling fans filled that void, mixed with the rustling of leaves passing between his fingers. I breathed with difficulty, with my heart beating like a drum. Emily took my hand under the table, and I felt her warmth sustain me in that last stretch. The judge looked up. His voice was grave and clear. "The court orders immediate annulment of the land transfer, freezing of Michael Mendez's assets protection order in favor of Steve Ramirez and his daughter Emily, and referral of the case to the prosecutor's office for domestic violence and fraud." The room exploded in murmurs. Some people applauded timidly, others sighed with relief. I stayed still, unable to react immediately. I only felt my muscles loosen, as if the tension of so many days finally found an exit. Michael, sitting a few meters away, collapsed in his chair. The color went from his face. He was no longer the haughty man who had entered the court with a new suit, but a defeated being. 2 police officers approached, lifted him firmly, and put handcuffs on him. The metallic shine of the shackles flashed under the room's light. From the audience, shouts were heard. "Coward! Abuser!" I lowered my head, not out of shame, but because the emotion was too great. My eyes filled with silent tears. It was not complete joy, because nothing would erase what was lived, but it was a justice that returned a little dignity. Upon leaving the building, the midday sun blinded us. The square in front of the court was full of pigeons that took flight, suddenly beating their wings with a dry thunder. The air was warm, and the noise of cameras surrounded us again. Several reporters rushed, launching questions I did not manage to understand. Lawyer Thompson stepped in, raising a hand to push them aside, following us quickly to the car. "Calmly, Steve," he told me in a low voice while opening the door. "The worst is over." The journey back home seemed different to me. The city streets remained bustling, vendors offered fresh fruit, children ran along the sidewalks. But for me, everything had a new color. I felt that every tree, every building received me like a man who had survived his storm. Upon arriving, the first thing I saw was Mrs. Higgins, waiting at the door with a basket of sweet bread covered with an embroidered cloth. As soon as she saw me, she ran towards me and hugged me with surprising strength for her age. "We won, Steve, we won," she shouted with joy that spread to everyone nearby. Emily smiled, although her eyes were wet. She followed me to the old wooden armchair on the porch. There I sat, exhausted but with a light soul. She brought me a glass of fresh water with lemon slices and mint leaves that perfumed the air. The aroma reminded me of the summers of my youth when everything was simpler. My grandson ran out to the patio. He threw himself into my arms with a scream. "Grandpa, now you are safe!" I hugged him carefully, pressing my cheek against his hair. That instant was worth more than any sentence, more than any recovered land. The evening fell little by little. From the street, the call of a vendor was heard. Hot donuts. The air brought with it the smell of roasted coffee mixed with the smoke from the nearby market grills. Inside the kitchen, Emily began to prepare a pot of chili to share with the neighbors, who little by little arrived to congratulate us. The laughter, voices, and clinking of plates filled the house with a human warmth I had not felt for a long time. I sat watching life return to its course. I heard the metallic tapping of the spoon against the pot, the quick steps of children running in the patio, the murmur of happy conversations. I felt that finally the weight I carried in my chest lightened. When night fell and everyone left, the house remained calm. Emily cleared the plates, my grandson fell asleep on the sofa, and I, unable to sleep, went out to the porch again. The sky was clear, the stars shone with intensity. The moon illuminated the paved street, and the night air was fresh, clean, as if it wanted to purify everything. I sat in the wooden rocking chair, rested the cane to one side, and caressed my grandson's hair, who had fallen asleep, leaning on my leg. I closed my eyes for a moment. Everything lived, passed through my mind like a torrent. The blows, the humiliation, the fear, the shame. But also Emily's bravery, the solidarity of the neighbors, the firm voice of those who dared to declare the truth. And then I thought clearly, at my 69 years I can still fight, and I will do it always while my family needs me. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time I smiled in peace. At 1 a.m. I arrived, stumbling at my daughter's door. My ribs burned, my forehead bled, and I could barely stand. She opened, saw me destroyed, and between tears held me without asking questions. I could only whisper. It was Michael, because of his mistress. That night I knew there was no turning back. If you are watching this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story from, because I want to know how far this truth has reached. May God bless you always.